right, so if you can just kind of listen with one ear while you're working on what you're working on. Again, what I said I wanted to do was starting today, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 more class periods. All right, and I wanted to go over some of the material that was in this book, all right, that I had shown you previously. That is, come on, right there. That one, all right. That's called Professional ASP.NET MVC5. If you weren't here the other day, if you go out there, there is a folder with today's date on it. It's got that material in it. So I'm going to lecture on Chapter 1. Even if I'm the only one listening, I guess, I'm going to lecture anyway. All right. So going up to Chapter 1, it's called Getting Started. The reason that I'm going through this, not to waste my time, not to waste your time, but again, we will do some work next semester in the 163 Design and Implementation Projects class on Model View Controller Architecture. All right, and that's what this book is on. So you can see there are for this chapter, there are 4 objectives: understanding ASP.NET Model View Controller, an overview of ASP.NET Model View Controller 5, how to create how to create MVC5 applications and how they're structured. Now, as the author says here, it's a quick little intro to what it's about. And also, since this is a professional book, he keeps a lot of the descriptions to a minimum. So you can go out and find probably other resources out there that might be better. All right, if you wanted a little overview, and I put some of those out there also. So notice, as it says here on the bottom of page 1, whoops, sorry. ASP.NET MVC is a framework for building web apps. That's what it's for. All right, and they go through a lot of song and dance, but let's just jump right into it here on page 2. Here's the key part of the entire book. This is what you have to understand, because if you go in for a programming job, there's at least a chance you're going to be asked, hey Travis, what do you know about Model View Controller Architecture? Or something along those lines. At least after listening to this, you can say you've had an exposure to it. I wouldn't say that you would sit there and turn around after this and say, well, I'm an expert on it. You know, I've said this kind of stuff to you before. I don't consider myself to be an expert on much of anything. But when you work with MVC, as it says, it breaks an application into 3 main aspects: the model, the view, and the controller. And just asking you this, doesn't that sort of sound familiar? A model, view, controller? In other words, when you've got a model, a view, and a controller, isn't that kind of what we've been doing for a while? The model is sort of your HTML. Your view is sort of your CSS, and your controller is sort of your JavaScript. All right. So we've talked about this before, okay? And the way that he defines these 3 is the model is a set of classes that describes the data you're working with, so it's code. The view, it defines on how the application's UI will be displayed. You don't have to look, but please listen to this, because a big difference in Model View Controller apps, everything that you've been doing in here thus far, everything in this class, would you agree with this? You've been dragging controls out there on the forum and making stuff. Guess what? MVC doesn't support controllers. You can't drag them, or I'm sorry, it does not support server controls. You can't just drag them out there directly. You've got to code them in. All right, you can still use them, but you have to hard code them. What happens in MVC is all the code, everything you do, your interface, everything gets done in code. You might say, well, that stinks. But I will tell you, just so you see this. I don't know where I put this. Probably here. Okay, the lady from this place where that ad I put out there, okay, I sent her a letter the other day. I replied to her, and she said, again, my name is Whitney Newgard, and I'm calling to see if you have got any students for jobs in Rockford for C# and ASP.NET. So I wrote back and I said, good morning, this is Jeff Scott. Thank you for sharing it. I would be very interested in having you come into BTC to talk to my students. So she wrote back, and said, "Good evening. Thanks so much for responding so quickly to me. I would be very interested in coming in for a possible visit." So did you hear that? We're talking about having a possible employer come in here, along with her supervisor, Michael King. She said, "I do not want to ask for the sake of wasting your time. I want to ask, does your program teach ASP.NET and C#? We currently have companies that are working with ASP.NET and C#. I'm willing to put money on it that one or more of those companies are using model view controller architecture." All right, so I wrote back to her today. "Good morning, Whitney Newgard. Thanks for getting back to me. Students get C# in the 152-142 Intro to .NET Programming course with me, and the ASP.NET, and ASP.NET in the 152-161 Web App Development using ASP.NET course with me. Then I gave her both course descriptions. I'll await word from you regarding a possible classroom visit." I'm hoping she comes in here next week. If she doesn't come in here next week, she probably won't the following week, because that's Thanksgiving week, and companies get all screwed up during that time. All right? I'm also going to make sure I get one of her cards and one of her boss's cards. So come spring, when we have the presentations for the 152-163 Design and Implementation Projects class, there'll be 2 more people that I'll invite. So you'll have a chance to show them the work that you've been doing, even if it's not C#, even if it's not ASP.NET. All right? We'll talk more about that at a later time. So the model is a set of classes that describes the data you're working with. The view is how that data is displayed. And the controller is the set of classes that handle communication. So the controller is kind of the referee between the model and the view. The model and the view do not talk directly to one another. All right. Models are classes that represent the domain you're interested in. View is the template to dynamically generate HTML. And controller is the special class that manages the relationship between the view and the model. So then the author comes through here and gives you a whole big song and dance. This was ASP.NET MVC1 7 years ago. Then ASP.NET MVC2 4 years ago. Then ASP.NET MVC3. All right, about 3 years ago. And the key thing, if you look up on the screen here, is this right there. The way that you write code in here changed with MVC3. They put in a new engine that's called Razor. Okay? So instead of writing code kind of like this, that you see right here, you change and you write it like this. It's much more English-like. Okay, we'll take a look at that, but not right now. Then MVC4 was released about, I think, 2 years ago, and the newest, latest, and greatest is MVC5. The author's going to talk about a lot of things in this book. Bundling, minification, scaffolding. We'll hit on some of those as we go on in here. Notice this. This is unreal for a Microsoft product. ASP.NET MVC is open source. All right. So here is the overview of MVC5. This is the stuff it's supposed to have. Again, I don't expect that you'll listen to this and understand all of it, but at least you've heard it. Again, if you were to apply to one of those jobs, they will probably ask you, what's your experience with Model View Controller? So you can say, well, the instructor has been talking about it the last few weeks in class, and we've done a little bit of work on it, but not too much. Well, what can you tell me about what the architecture means? You can at least say, model basically is the way that you write classes to typically describe your database. All right. The view is the HTML that you want to render back to the end user, and the controller is what takes the information in from the HTTP response, sends it to the correct model, all right, gets it back from the model, sends it to the view, gets it back from the view, and sends it back to the user. All right. The idea now is you get one ASP.NET, and I want to show you something. I don't know if you've seen this before or not, but give me a second to load this, because I thought I had the virtual desktop up, and evidently I don't. This is new. This is cool, what I'm about to show you. All right? This is new as of Visual Studio 2013. So unless you've done this before, what I'm about to show you, you've never seen. All right? And I'll say it's cool, and you might say, big hairy ass deal. But it is cool, because this is the one ASP.NET that they talk about. Okay, so I'm going to come in here and I'm going to start up Visual Studio 2013. And when I do, all right, I'm going to, and again, if everybody look at this, just so at least you've seen it, I'm going to do a file, new, but instead of saying new website like we've been doing, I'm saying new project like we used to do. All right, so I'm doing new project. Because what I'm showing you right now is new. You might say, what's new? That's new. Right there. There's just one kind of project that you create here. Doesn't matter what you're putting in it. Come 2013, it's just one project. They want you to create something in here, and they want you to call it MVC Music Store. So I'm going to just create it right now. All right, and I'm going to say OK. Now notice what changes. That's new. If I want it to be a brand new empty spanking project with nothing in it, I choose that. If I want what we did back in the 142 class, we just want an ASP.NET web format, we choose this. MVC, which is what we're going to choose, we choose that. API for Application Program Interface, that's if you're working with stuff, as it says, if you're working with REST type of stuff. I'm not going to get into any of that. Single page app. If you want to write yourself a single page web app, it uses this along with HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript, and Angular JavaScript. And then finally Facebook, if you're creating a Facebook-like app. All right, I'm going to choose MVC. Notice if we want to, we can still tell it to add stuff for web forms. We can still tell it to add stuff, bless you, for web API. We're not going to. But the recommendation is, regardless of which one of these you choose, always click the button there that says Add Unit Tests. Doing that makes it easier if later on you want to add unit tests. Also, notice, regardless of which one of these you choose, you can change the authentication. You can say there's none. All right, you can set it up so once you've logged into your Windows account, boom, you're in, which is, I guess, that one. All right, for intranet. Organizational. All right, so if you were using an extranet type of thing, all right, and we're just going to use right here. For apps that use profiles in an SQL database, that's what we've been using, so we're just going to keep that. Now, what's new is watch what happens when I click OK. It's generating the project, and it'll take a little longer. Why? Take a look at our Solution Explorer, because there's a hell of a lot more in it than you've ever seen before. And I'm going to run it, and I'm going to ask you a question. If you don't know, but you think you might know, guess. And if you don't know, then it'll be very quiet in here for about 5 seconds. All right, so it's just about created it. And what you'll notice is there's a lot more folders than you typically see here. You notice there's a folder that says controllers. You notice there's a folder in here that says models. And there's a folder in here that says views. That's the model view controller stuff. All right. There's also one that says scripts. It automatically adds jQuery and a bunch of other stuff. All right. Now I'm going to run this. What I'm telling you right now is what I hope we're going to do in spring. Okay? All right. It's not going to look all that sensational, but the look and feel of this has changed a lot between this and what we saw back in Visual Studio 2012. Does anybody know, if you look at this page right here, and you look here and you look at the stuff below it, do you know what kind of framework they used to create that? Okay, not all at once. What? Yes, it is. That's Bootstrap. And this thing that's right here goes by different names. Typically, it's called a jumbotron. Something that you want to stick on a page goes up near the top to have it stand out. It's not a slider, and that because the slider moves, this isn't designed to even move. All right. You could call it a banner, yeah. All right. And notice then we've got 3 different headings here. What I want us to do as soon as we come in in fall, or in spring rather, and we're going to start creating a project in the 163 class. It's going to be a PHP.NET object-oriented programming project. But we're going to use Bootstrap, if we can, to create the website. Okay? Then we'll add stuff to it using PHP, object-oriented PHP. If that's too hard, then we'll just do it regular. But I'd like to do that, so at least, again, you've had some exposure to Bootstrap. All right. That's the idea with the one ASP.NET. Okay? They tried to make the identity, logging in, logging out, easier. All right? Somebody tell me this. Don't read it. It's probably in here, but don't read it anyway. What's the difference between authentication and authorization? Well, when you log in, what are they doing? No, technically, they're authorizing you. That's what they're doing. They're authorizing you based on what your login and password are. And based on those, you are then, after you've been authenticated, you are authorized then to do certain things. As students, you're authorized to have your H drive. You're authorized to see the P drive in here. And if you're in this program, you're authorized then to have the ability to hook on to a virtual desktop. Does that make sense? What they've tried to do is, for applications that use this stuff, they've tried to make it easier for just the whole ASP.NET authorization and authentication. There's the template. That's the way it used to look. Back in Visual Studio 2012, if you ran that same thing we just looked at right here, all right, it looked like this. Not quite as cool. The home and about work, but they didn't do anything. It just came up and said, you put your home stuff here, and you put your, and that's kind of what it does now too. But the home page looks a lot better. And you get Bootstrap by default. All right, it says templates run on the Bootstrap framework. All right, and again, you've already seen that. Yes. All right. In fact, if you don't, for some reason, if you create a brand new empty Visual Studio project, all right, you decide you want it to be empty and you want to add stuff yourself. Remember how we did NuGet? I know that with some people, NuGet's a four-letter word, but remember we did NuGet, we added the jQuery stuff? If you go into NuGet and instead of jQuery, you type that into that search box, you type in Bootstrap, it'll allow you to add Bootstrap. You end up getting jQuery and a bunch more. What Bootstrap is it's a series of files, of template files. And it's broken down. What you care about typically in Bootstrap is a folder that's called dist, D-I-S-T. That's the distribution folder. It's got 3 folders in it. Those 3 folders that are in it have, one's called CSS, one's called HTML, and one's called JS for JavaScript. And they're filled, if you go out to the CSS folder, there's literally 1 file in there. What's bad about it is it's 7,000 lines long, which kind of makes it, as you probably guess, kind of tough to work with. So what you can do is you can also, when you load this, you can load in what's called less. I don't even want to get into what that is. Other than it's taking those 7,000 lines and breaking them up into a bunch of different smaller files so you can work with them individually, which is much easier to do. All right. And again, I hope to talk about that stuff next year. What I'd like to do after we get back from the break is to go over Chapter 9, which talks about routing. You know, my plan is to go over Chapter 1 today, Chapter 2 next Tuesday, Chapter 3 next Thursday, Chapter 4 the following Thursday. Then no class 2 weeks from today because of Thanksgiving. Chapter 5 the Tuesday we come back, Chapter 6 the Thursday we come back. The last week we're here, that Tuesday go over Chapter 7 and 8, and then the last period go over Chapter 9. All right. Now, that's a lot to do, but if you look, there's actually 17 chapters in this book. Well, there's just not enough time to go through all of them. It just doesn't work. So we'll go through at least the first half of the book. Scaffolding is kind of cool. Now, again, you don't have to look, but please listen to this because this is really, I think, this is really, really cool. What you can do with code is you can basically have ASP.NET build your database for you without you having to write any code whatsoever. Not even get in and create a database. It'll do everything for you. I think that's pretty friggin' cool. All right, we'll talk about that in a later class. All right. You need at least Vista, Service Pack 2. We've got that. All right, you need at least, to be running one of these operating systems. The install we've already gotten done, so it's no big thing. Again, the stuff that's in this book, please listen to this. The stuff that's in this book is based off of something else that I put out there on the system for you. All right, again, if you go out to the folder with today's date on it, so if you go out right there, this is what you see in there. This professionalasp.net, that's the one we're going through right now. That's this. There's all the code for the book. I didn't extract it. All right, this is the thing that the author talks about. This same thing, John Galloway, the author of this book, wrote this too. This is such a cool thing. I've thought of going over it, and if I get time this summer, what I'll probably do is go over it again and see how much of it still applies, because this was back like in MVC3. All right, they haven't upgraded it for MVC5. I wish they would. All right, but there's some great examples in here. It's a 140-page approximately tutorial. So just to show you this real quick, the author says here, let's create our first brand new MVC project. All right, so I'm on page 17 of the book. Let me grab so I don't have to keep whipping back and forth between these. No, this is the same book that I've got up on the screen right now. It's a red book, and its cover actually looks like this, but that's all red. If you go out to the folder that I just showed you, the PDF for this entire book is out there. All right, it went out to itebooks.info and grabbed the entire book. All right, so I'm going to come back into here, and this is our new project. All right, so they told us to go in there, choose File, New Project. All right, and then they say, so I've done this. They say this is what you'll see. Choose Web Forms. We did that. All right, and it says this explains what those folder, the difference in those things that are in there. MVC, as it says, comes complete with a controller and some views and a bunch of other stuff. Empty is just empty with just a web config. Web Forms is the old Web Forms type of thing. Web API, again, as it says, it's for REST. I'm not going to talk about that single page. I'm not going to talk about Facebook. I'm not going to talk about. All right. So the author, again, says check that box for adding unit tests, because you'll probably want to add them sooner or later. And just use the default for configuring your authentication. Boom. Here's those different things I just showed you with the authentication. It's on page 22 in this PDF. So it explains what each one of those are. All right. Also, you may or may not have seen this before, but I want you to see it. Let's see if they show it here. Right there. Anybody know what this is? Right there where I'm putting the mouse. It says Windows Azure, or Azure, depending on which book you read. If you sign up for an Azure account, what it does is it gives you, I think, up to like 10 domains, and it allows you to start putting stuff out there. Please listen to this. You can start hosting stuff out on the cloud. All right, they give you, it's about a gig, I think, and they give you about 10 different domain names. So if Zach decided that what he wanted to do was for stuff that he wants to show potential employers, he wants to put some stuff out there on the cloud, he can do that. It's free. Okay, so it's something at least worth looking into. All right, just go out and Google, a Windows Azure account, and it'll tell you how you can set one up. No, I don't have one. All right, so then they show you all the stuff that we saw over here with the models, the views, and the controllers. Then they explain that structure, and they talk about what's in all these. So the controllers folder, as it says, is where you put your controller classes. Models, where you put classes that represent the database and your business object. Views is where you put the UI template files. Again, you can't directly just drag controls out there anymore. It's not going to work like that. Scripts is where you put your JavaScript. You saw there was jQuery in there, but if you put your own JavaScript, it goes in there also. Fonts, Bootstrap, as it says, puts its own custom font system in there, which is kind of neat. Content, where you put your CSS, your images, and other stuff. App data, where you put the files you want to read, write. And app start is where you put, when the program literally starts up where you want it to go. Then the author mentions afterwards, if you don't like that, you can literally say, I don't like that structure, I'm going to put in my own. But the recommendation is when you're first working on this, just use the default structure that you have until you understand it. Okay, so by default, as it says right here, when we get into this, okay, I'm going to stop the run here, stop debugging, and I'm going to close this scripts folder. If you look under controllers, we get two controllers by default. One that's called accountcontroller.cs, one that's called homecontroller.cs. Right now they do almost nothing. The home controller is for your home page. The account controller is in case you want to add any of that authentication and authorization that we just talked about. All right? So that's what the author mentions here, what that controller's directory and what's in there. The views, as it says, the views directory here on page 26. So if you look in there, this looks ugly as hell when you first look at it. You say, well, that doesn't look bad. There's not much in it. Well, look what's in it. All right, I'll look at the one for home. Notice there's one for account, one for home, and one you can share things. All right, right now that's all that's in it. Every time you create a new view, some HTML you want to send back to the user, you create a new view. Sometimes these folders will have 50, 60, 100 files in them. All right, also notice the extension. CS HTML, C# HTML. All right. And the author says then that, again, as I already mentioned to you, oops, in the scripts, that's where you see all of your Java jQuery and any other jQuery that you want to add. All right, and again, these files are provided by default by Visual Studio to give you a basic structure for setting up the stuff that you've already seen. All right. Guess what? I'm almost done. I'm on page 27 now, and there's 30 pages in this chapter. So if you bear with me for 5 more minutes, I'll be done. So it says ASP.NET MVC applications by default rely on conventions. What does that mean? That means there's certain ways that you should word this stuff. All right. The controller for our home page is called Home Controller. The controller for our accounts page is called Account Controller. Get the idea? Those are the kind of conventions that they say that you should follow. Why? Notice by default, ASP.MVC looks for view templates within the views controller name directory. That's why, again, if I look back here and I go to views, there was one for account. What does that mean? Well, that's for the account controller. There's one for home, and that's for the home controller. And if you want to share things between them, that's that shared directory. All right, so ASP.NET, the more you follow those conventions, the easier it will be for ASP.NET to figure out what you're trying to do. And it's mentioned here, they refer to that as convention over configuration. And they're trying to sell you as to why you'd want to even do this. All right, I read through this, and I've read articles on there that say, you know, again, I don't get this. Why? Why the hell do I even want to do all this stuff? All right, and here's the magic answer. It's possible that at a company that's of fairly large size, you have at a minimum 3 different types of programmers. People who are web developers who really know how to create nice looking HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. People who are ASP.NET developers who understand how to create programs but don't give a lick about what stuff looks like and don't have to care about it. All right, and then people who are database programmers. You're dividing this stuff into model view controller so that the view people can do all the HTML, the model people can do all the database, and the controller people are your ASP.NET developers. That's why. And that's what the author talks about here. And that was it. In the next chapter that we'll go over next week, we'll talk about controllers. It'll take a little bit more time. I'm going to suggest that as we go through this, you go, at least for chapter 2, the example that's in here is really simple. Literally, it'll take us 5 or 10 minutes to do. But I suggest you do this. Because again, if you do the examples in chapters 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, at least if you go in for an interview and you're asked about model view controller, you can say, we've gone through this book. We didn't go through all of it because we had a different textbook, but I've gone through it and I've done some work on it on my own. Okay, that said, please don't go into an interview and lie. I always tell this story, and maybe I've mentioned it to you, I don't know. I used to always put down under major classes. I put down different classes that I took when I got my degrees. My first degree, which was in journalism, I put some of those classes. My second degree, which is in data processing, that's what it was called before it was called IT or information technology. I put in some of those classes. All right, and now for my master's, I put in some of those. When I didn't have my master's yet, and I was trying to get a job at AT&T. All right, so I had some of the classes I put in there from Mid-State Technical College, not Mid-State, North Central Technical College, where I got my 2-year degree. And a guy who was interviewing me said, oh, and I had some really obscure class name in there, which I actually took and got an A in. And he goes, I took that. What did you think of it? And I'm starting, you ever go in your head and you're like, okay, all right, start processing. I don't have a flaming clue as to what that class was about. So I tried to BS my way through it. He goes, you don't even remember, do you? I said, no. He goes, you really shouldn't put it on your resume then. All right, case in point for you guys. Anything you put on your resume, be willing to back up. So if you put in there that you understand model view controller architecture, it's not inconceivable that you could be put in and take a test where you were asked what you know about model view controller architecture. I'm talking about having a fundamental understanding of what's going on. Now, to go back to your question, all right? All right, this thing that's right here. This is a 7-document thing, model view controller step by step. That's the good news. And the bad news, and it's not bad, when I say this, please believe me, I'm not trying to sound like I'm going through and being discriminatory or racist or anything like that. The guy who does this, he also has YouTube videos for these. They're really well done. They're real simple. That's the good news. The bad news, he's from India, and it sounds like it. So quite often, he's hard to understand. He really knows his stuff. But I want to say one more thing about what you just asked, Mark, and that is this. Same guy. Give me a break. Find it. Now I gotta find it. It might even be in here. So, oh, there it is. 45 pages. 100 of the most important MVC interview questions you may be asked. All right. Now you would come on. You're not gonna be asked all those, but the ones that are at the beginning are the most fundamental. So if you're going to go for a job interview and be asked that kind of stuff, at least I'd glance through this. All right. So I put that out there. It's by the same guy who makes these tapes. All right. And notice he's even got a YouTube for this one. Okay. So he knows his stuff. Like I said, the only thing is he's, at times at least, can be a little bit hard to understand. All right. I think that's worth it anyway. So, well, again, what we'll do next class is we're going to go over chapter 2. And it'll probably take the whole hour, so I'm going to start right at 10. And I'm going to keep doing this for the rest of the semester. And I'm done now.